My ex-wife committed identity theft, tried to take our son, and the judge's final decision left everyone stunned. It's astonishing how a single moment can completely change the course of your life. 4 years ago, I found myself in a small, fluorescent-lit courthouse, signing away a divorce I never thought would ever come to pass. Even though the judge's final decree left a bitter taste in my mouth, I still held on to a sliver of hope. After all, it was over. The endless fights, the constant accusations, everything was supposed to be buried with that divorce paper. I consoled myself with the thought that the worst was behind us. We had separated, and now we both had the opportunity to build entirely new lives. I naively believed it would be that simple. Initially, my ex-wife, let's call her Tiff, appeared to be completely cooperative. Perhaps I was simply desperate to believe that we could put aside the bitterness of our shattered marriage for the sake of our 8-year-old son, Daniel. The custody agreement gave Tiffany primary custody since she resided in the same school district Daniel had always attended, while I was allotted alternating weekends, summers, and holidays. I clung to that schedule with a resigned kind of hope, dreaming of the day when Daniel would be older and we could finally shift to a 50-50 arrangement with less conflict. However, Tiffany had different plans from the very beginning, and soon enough, my illusions of peaceful co-parenting were shattered. At that time, I had already accepted a job transfer to a branch located about 30 miles away from the small city we once called home. I managed to secure a house closer to my new workplace, one with a generous yard that I imagined Daniel could enjoy on weekends. I can still recall the look of pure delight on his face when I first showed him around. The old oak tree in the backyard was perfect for climbing, and I even had a half-baked idea about installing a basketball hoop out. Maybe I was an eternal optimist, but I truly believed that this house symbolized a fresh start, a second chance at happiness for me. And for a brief period, things were surprisingly amicable despite the turbulent aftermath of 4 years of separation, bitter arguments, and tension. Tiffany had her own life, and I had mine. On paper, it all seemed workable. Then, one seemingly ordinary Wednesday afternoon, about 18 months after the divorce was finalized, I came home late from work after a marathon of back-to-back meetings. My feet felt heavy, and my mind was muddled with exhaustion and the typical guilt I felt for only seeing Daniel on weekends. When I opened my mailbox, I discovered a crisp white envelope from a collection agency. I was puzzled. It had to be a mistake, as I was certain I had no debts and collections. Inside the envelope was a letter stating that I was severely delinquent on a credit card account. My heart sank as I scanned the document, searching for the company's name that I supposedly owed money to. When I recognized the store's name on the account, my confusion deepened. I was adamant that I had never applied for such a card. Within roughly 15 minutes of poring over my personal records and credit history, I confirmed that not only had I not opened that account, but there were 2 additional accounts listing me as the primary cardholder. The statements all bore Tiffany's address, and the purchases were made at places she frequented: a local cosmetics boutique, a grocery store adjacent to her apartment, and even a couple of children's clothing shops that I recognized from Daniel's old receipts. My hands trembled as I flipped through those pages, and a crushing dread settled in my stomach. I knew who was behind this, but it was hard to believe that she would stoop to impersonating me on credit applications. Our divorce had been messy enough, but this was not just petty, it was criminal. I was tempted to call her immediately, thinking maybe there was an innocent explanation or perhaps a mistake, but the stern red text warning of legal recourse and credit repercussions left no room for misunderstanding. It wasn't a simple error. The betrayal cut deeper than I cared to admit. In the days following our divorce, we had at least verbally agreed to prioritize Daniel's best interests. All those illusions of good faith co-parenting vanished as I stared at the evidence that Tiffany had effectively stolen my identity. I spent that night formulating a plan in my mind. Part of me wanted to rush over to her place the moment I confirmed the fraud. Another part counseled that I should secure my credit, contact a lawyer, and refuse any conversation that wasn't mediated. In the end, I decided on a direct, face-to-face confrontation. I wanted to give her a chance to explain privately before involving the police. For Daniel's sake, I believed caution was essential. The last thing I wanted was for him to witness another bitter showdown, parading our family drama in a courtroom once. That Monday, I had to drop Daniel off after our scheduled weekend visit. Usually, Tiffany greeted me at the door with a neutral or vaguely polite expression, a silent thanks for returning him on time. But this time, the tension was palpable. After exchanging minimal pleasantries, once Daniel was out of earshot, I held up the collection letter, my voice trembling as I tried to remain composed. "I know what you did," I said, unsure whether to shout or keep my tone measured. "There are credit card accounts in my name sent to your address. I received a notice from a collection agency." For a split second, her eyes revealed genuine fear, as if the gravity of her actions was suddenly crashing down on her. But then she regained her composure. "You must be mistaken," she replied coldly, with a hint of indignation in her tone. "Why would I open credit cards in your name? I have my own finances." I scoffed, stunned by her denial. "The statements are addressed to you. There's no way this is a mere coincidence. She folded her arms and retorted, "Look, I have no idea what you're talking about. I have my own income. I don't need to steal from." Something inside me snapped. The surge of anger was overwhelming. "If you don't pay them off and close those accounts immediately, I'm going to the police," I warned, in a low, determined voice. "I won't let my credit be ruined because of you." Her expression changed then. What had started as feigned confusion turned into a cold, calculated resolve. "If you go to the police," she shot back, "I'll claim that you're a danger to Dan. Don't think I won't keep him away. You can take me to court again. You know I've done it before." Her words stopped me in my tracks. I recalled how swiftly she had once ripped Daniel from my weekends after a previous disagreement. I had spent months battling in court just to enforce a basic visitation schedule. And though I technically had won, it had been a punishing, stressful, and expensive ordeal. The memory of Daniel's heartbreak at not understanding why he couldn't see me haunted me. How many times was I supposed to let her use our son as a bargaining chip? For the moment, I reluctantly backed down. "I'll talk to you later," I managed to say in a hoarse whisper as I turned away. I remember the smug curve of her lips, as if she had scored a victory. In a way, she had. I left feeling cornered, deeply worried about the impact on Daniel if I pressed charges. Yet I also knew that ignoring this would eventually ruin my credit and likely encourage her to keep opening accounts in my name. Within a week, my resolve solidified. I refused to be seen as a doormat who tolerated abuse out of fear. I also recognized that if Tiffany wasn't held accountable, she would never stop. She would continue to view me as an endless source of funds, or worse, repeatedly use my identity to rack up debt with no intention of repayment, and that could destroy my financial future. Despite the dread gnawing at me, I went to the local police station near my new home. I anticipated the process would be painful, even humiliating, but ironically, it turned out to be relatively straightforward. Identity theft, especially among ex-spouses or close family members, had become disturbingly common. The officer who took my statement barely batted an eye when I confessed that I suspected my ex-wife was behind it all. He diligently typed my account into the computer, pausing only to confirm addresses and recite my statements for accuracy. By the time the report was finalized, I felt a slight release. A burden had been lifted in knowing that I had done the right thing. But then, a heavier weight set in, the fear of Tiffany's inevitable reaction. Sure enough, later that week, I received an enraged phone call from her. Her voice was high-pitched and filled with a venom I had only heard on rare, isolated occasions. "You filed a police report?" she shrieked, her words nearly a blur. "What on earth were you thinking?" I struggled to maintain my composure as I responded, "I gave you a chance to fix this. You threatened to withhold Daniel." She exhaled sharply. "You really think you'll see him again now?" she spat. "You believe the courts will side with you? You're harassing me. I can't believe you'd stoop so low as to accuse me of a crime." The call devolved into a cacophony of shouting and tears. Tears that I couldn't tell if they were genuine or manipulative, until finally, she hung up. I leaned against my kitchen counter, head pounding, my mind racing with the prospect of Tiffany breaking our custody agreement. And sure enough, in the following weeks, she began denying me my scheduled weekends with Daniel. She claimed he didn't feel well, or that he had a friend's birthday party, or that he was busy with a project due. The excuses piled up, each one more transparent than the last. What hurt the most was not being able to see my son. I longed to drive over there, but my attorney warned me that Tiffany could easily call the police and claim I was trespassing or issuing threats. My only option was to meticulously document every instance of denied custody and compile it for court, and so I did. I maintained a journal, entered every exchange into a spreadsheet, and saved screenshots of text messages, missed calls, and emails. Every entry broke my heart a little more as I recorded yet another instance where she refused to let me see Daniel. I knew that eventually, a judge would notice the pattern. This was not in the best interest of Daniel, or mine. About 3 months passed, during which Tiffany allowed barely any contact with Daniel. I managed only a couple of brief video calls, each one heavily supervised by her, making the interactions awkward and stilted. Daniel, confused by the constant denials, never truly understood what was happening. I made sure never to speak ill of his mother. I simply reassured him that I loved him and was doing everything possible to restore normalcy. Meanwhile, the police report I had filed slowly made its way through the system, and I anxiously awaited news about potential charges. Unsurprisingly, I learned that credit card companies rarely pursue fraud claims against family members unless the sums involved are enormous, or unless the victim can muster significant legal force. For the time being, the immediate victory was that both fraudulent accounts vanished from my credit report, my score rebounded, and I set up a robust monitoring service that alerted me whenever someone attempted to open new credit lines in mine. I remember calling the detective assigned to my case, a weary, middle-aged man who had undoubtedly seen too many similar stories. "Look," he explained, "I understand your frustration, but the credit card companies just aren't inclined to chase these cases, especially if they're already restoring your credit. If you want to press charges, You'll need to talk directly with the county prosecutor's office. To be honest, they rarely pursue these cases unless it's an undeniable slam dunk with significant financial damages. A wave of rage and helplessness washed over. At least my credit was now secure. I told myself that was one small victory, even though it was overshadowed by the pain of missing time with Daniel. Several weeks later, a scheduled hearing took place in family court, a place filled with the anxious whispers of distressed parents, grandparents, children, and attorneys. Tiffany arrived with a defiant air, dressed in a crisp suit, her hair perfectly done, and her posture stiff, her expression straddling confidence and irritation. Her lawyer, whom I recognized from our divorce proceedings, appeared unimpressed as he sized me up. I had my own attorney, a quiet yet relentless woman named Carly, and together we presented mountains of documentation proving Tiffany's repeated violations of our custody order. I felt my nerves tremble as we argued that she had withheld Daniel from me on numerous occasions, and that she had even threatened to do so if I filed a police report about her fraud. Tiffany countered by portraying me as manipulative, controlling, and a financial threat to her stability, accusing me of being a dangerous presence around Daniel. The judge pressed her for specifics, but Tiffany faltered, offering nothing more than hearsay. "He's unstable," she claimed, "and with all these credit card accusations, you're making it impossible for me to manage finances for Daniel's needs." My lawyer calmly produced the police report that confirmed I was the victim, along with copies of the credit card statements addressed to Tiffany. The judge, a tired-looking middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair, frowned at the documents. He noted that there was no active fraud case, yet the statements undeniably pointed to suspicious activity. Then he turned to Tiffany and said, "You understand that this child custody arrangement is court-ordered. If you continue to withhold visitation without a legally valid reason, you could be held in contempt." Tiffany's eyes briefly met hers with her lawyer, but she said nothing. My heart pounded. Part of me felt relief, yet I was still anxious. We left the courtroom with a stern warning from the judge and a slight modification to the custody arrangement. I was awarded extra holiday time, increasing my contact with Daniel. It was something, though. I could sense Tiffany's simmering fury. No matter how I tried to remain calm, I knew the battle wasn't over. A few days after the hearing, Tiffany called and demanded additional money, more child support and alimony. This request caught me off guard, since the divorce proceedings had already settled the alimony, which was set to end after a fixed period, and child support was determined by both our incomes. I didn't have a surplus of cash to spare. "What do you mean you need more?" I asked, exasperated. "I can't keep up with the expenses," she replied. "Daniel needs new clothes and extracurricular activity. If you want me to abide by the custody arrangement, you need to contribute more financially." I struggled to hide my anger as I replied, "This is extortion. If Daniel needs something, I'll pay for it direct. But I'm not giving you any extra cash beyond what I already owe in child support." She abruptly ended the call, leaving my stomach in knots. I sensed that every interaction with her was a potential minefield. Sure enough, about a week later, I received an email alert from my new credit monitoring service. "A new account has been opened in your name." My heart sank. The address on the account was Tiffany's. This time, I managed to contact the lender immediately, shutting down the account before it could be finalized. Relief mixed with fury as I documented another incident, filed another police report, and made another round of calls to the credit bureau, eventually freezing my credit to prevent further attempts. Of course, when I confronted Tiffany, she responded with the same cold defiance. "Prove it's me," she texted, scoffing. "Maybe someone stole your identity again." I nearly lost my mind reading that, but I forced myself to remain calm for Daniel's sake. I filed the necessary paperwork and prepared for yet another lengthy hearing, certain that I would have to present even more evidence while watching Tiffany try to wriggle out of any accountability. Then, a turning point came sooner than expected, a Wednesday afternoon that would change everything. I was at work when my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Answering it, I was shocked to hear a representative from the state's Department of Children and Family Services. "Mr. Garrison," the social worker said in a concerned tone, "we have your son, Daniel, at the hospital for a checkup following a possible domestic incident. We need you to come immediately." My heart skipped a beat. "Is he okay?" I asked urgently, already rising from my seat and grabbing my coat. "He's stable," she reassured. "He sustained a small injury to the side of his head and required a couple of stitches. There was an altercation between your ex-wife and another adult in the home, and we believe Daniel was accidentally knocked into a piece of furniture. We just want to check for a concussion." I rushed out the door, my coworkers staring as I explained briefly that there was an emergency involving my child. The drive to the hospital, normally hindered by mid-afternoon traffic, became a blur as I gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. All I could think about was Daniel's face, his boundless energy, his carefree sprints across the yard, now marred by injury. When I arrived, I practically ran into the emergency department. A nurse directed me to a curtained area where I found Daniel sitting on the edge of a hospital bed, his feet dangling anxiously. The moment he saw me, tears welled up in his eyes and my own vision blurred with emotion. I pulled him into a tight embrace, overwhelmed with gratitude that he was conscious and able to speak. The social worker, introducing herself as Ms. Lopez, explained the situation further. Tiffany's new boyfriend had recently moved in, and they frequently argued. That particular night, an argument escalated into a physical altercation, and Daniel was caught in the crossfire. He had been too close when Tiffany's boyfriend shoved her, causing her to stumble into Daniel. As a result, he had toppled over a coffee table, slicing open the side of his head. A surge of anger and protective instinct overwhelmed. Daniel had never mentioned any of this, likely out of loyalty or fear of causing trouble. Ms. Lopez informed me that both Tiffany and her boyfriend had been detained briefly by the police, though they were released the next day without any formal charges, as neither adult pressed charges and Daniel's injuries were relatively minor. What cut the deepest was when Daniel looked up at me with tearful eyes and said, "Dad, I don't want to live there anymore. I'm scared of Mom's boyfriend." I hugged him even tighter, choking back the torrent of emotion. Ms. Lopez explained that they were working on a safety plan and asked if I could assume full-time custody of Daniel until the next court date, noting that the courts had already flagged Tiffany for previous custody violations and a potential risk of identity fraud. Without hesitation, I agreed, feeling an immense relief wash over me. I had fought so hard and been stonewalled at every turn, and now the Child Protection Agency was effectively granting me custody. It was surreal, though it pained me that Daniel had to be hurt for this to occur. Before we left the hospital, Daniel underwent one final checkup, and the nurse mentioned that his stitches would be removed in about a week. I thanked everyone repeatedly as we drove home in silence. Daniel sat in the passenger seat, small and quiet, biting his lip and gazing out the window. Once we arrived at my house, my new wife, yes, I had remarried some time back, rushed out, tears in her eyes, to envelop Daniel in a warm embrace as if he were her own. She had been a constant pillar of support throughout this ordeal, and although our home felt incomplete without Daniel's regular presence, it was now, under these dire circumstances, a place where he could stay, at least temporarily. In the days that followed, I contacted Daniel's school and arranged for a special pass to ensure that Tiffany could not pick him up without prior authorization. When she attempted to do so the very next week, the school staff refused to release him, citing the ongoing custody dispute and the protective measures in place. I even received a discreet call from the principal confirming that Tiffany had shown up, demanded Daniel, and left when they threatened to call the campus police. Another court date was scheduled soon after, originally meant to address Tiffany's repeated violations of our custody order. However, with the domestic incident now in the picture, everything had changed dramatically. Tiffany failed to appear at the hearing, possibly out of fear of being reprimanded or questioned about the identity theft. The judge, seemingly exasperated, granted my petition for a major custody alteration, awarding me primary physical custody while allowing Tiffany only visitation rights. The next hearing was meant for Tiffany to contest this new arrangement, but she never appeared. The judge, frustrated, finalized the new custody order. In one decisive moment, all the years of struggle to see Daniel consistently culminated in an order that named me the custodial parent. He was officially staying with me. The blend of joy, relief, and heartbreak was overwhelming. I wish things had resolved without Daniel ever being hurt. Yet I recognized that, despite everything, he was now safe and living in a stable environment, free from Tiffany's constant manipulation. There was still one final matter, the ongoing identity theft. One might expect that by now, given Tiffany's repeated attempts to open accounts in my name, even one I managed to stop before it was finalized, some legal authority would step in. But it became painfully clear that local prosecutors had little interest in pursuing fraud charges against her, particularly after the credit card companies removed those accounts from my reports. My attorney explained that pursuing criminal charges could cost tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees with no guarantee of conviction. She advised me to focus on protecting Daniel, safeguarding my credit, and letting go of the criminal pursuit for the sake of my own mental health. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but I tried to accept it. At least the immediate crises were over. Daniel was with me, and my credit was secure. The rest, I decided, was up to fate or to Tiffany's eventual misfortune if she tried to defraud someone else. Over the next few months, the emotional roller coaster began to slow, though it never entirely ceased. Daniel fully enrolled in my local school district. I drove him to school each morning, and during our 30-minute commutes, we bonded as he recounted how strange it felt not to see his mother every day. I encouraged him to maintain some contact with her if he wished, but we both agreed that, for now, he felt safer without going to her apartment. Occasionally, Tiffany would text or email, oscillating between guilt-tripping and demanding more money. "You took my son away from me," she would accuse. "I can't believe you're so heartless. He should be with his mother." Her logic made no sense, given that she had consistently denied me contact with Daniel for months, effectively forcing the court's hand. I repeatedly explained that she was free to arrange supervised visitation as per the court's orders, but I wouldn't allow her to simply whisk him away whenever she fancied. Daniel needed consistency, and he was still healing from the trauma of that violent incident. Gradually, the angry messages from Tiffany faded into silence. No calls, no visitations, just an eerie quiet. Daniel even tried texting her a couple of times, but she rarely responded. I watched the disappointment flicker in his eyes every time he sought a connection with her, only to be met with nothing. My wife and I did everything we could to fill that void, showering Daniel with attention, planning family outings, and making sure he always felt loved. Slowly, I began to notice changes in him. He started bringing friends over, and we transformed the spare room into a gaming area for him. He joked about finally having a yard after living in an apartment, and I discovered he had quite a talent for basketball. We'd spend hours playing together on weekends, exchanging playful banter and working up a sweat. There were still nights when nightmares haunted him, and I would sit by his bedside until he managed to fall asleep. Bit by bit, we established a routine, one where Daniel was safe, secure, and free from the unpredictable whims of Tiffany's mood swings. Months eventually turned into a year, and during that time, the court closed the active case, solidifying the custody arrangement in my favor. Tiffany's identity theft never resulted in any convictions, and eventually, the county sent a final letter stating that they would not pursue prosecution. I accepted this outcome with a heavy heart, even as it left a lingering bitterness. As my attorney Carly had advised, it was better to let go of the criminal fight and concentrate on the life Daniel and I were building together. In the end, Tiffany's threats, manipulations, and fraudulent actions only served to drive Daniel further away from her, rather than create the wedge she had intended. She made a final power play when Daniel turned 13, a sudden petition demanding additional child support, insisting she was the rightful custodian and that the new custody order had been imposed on. The judge swiftly dismissed her motion, noting that not only had she missed previous hearings, but that Daniel was already living primarily with me according to the official order. Tiffany stormed out of the courtroom in a fury, her eyes blazing, and I haven't heard of any new credit card scams since then. Now, Daniel is nearing 14. And as far as I can tell, he's thriving, playing basketball at school, doing well in his classes, and excitedly chatting about his new circle of friends. Occasionally, I see a hint of sadness when he tries to call his mother and gets no answer. He's old enough to understand that her side of the story is complicated. I never encourage him to harbor hatred toward her. Instead, I remind him that if she ever wants to rebuild a healthy relationship, I will support him. As for me, I continue to work on letting go of it still crashes over me in waves, especially when I see reminders of how easily some people exploit the system. Yet I find solace in the knowledge that I have given Daniel a safe, loving home, and that, no matter how ugly things became, I never stopped fighting for what was right for him. Tiffany tried everything, attempting to withhold him, jeopardize my financial stability, and even threaten me with more false claims. But in the end, her own destructive behavior backfired. I often wonder what might have happened if she had simply approached me about needing extra money instead of forging my name. Even if I hadn't had spare cash, perhaps we could have reached an arrangement for Daniel's expenses. But by crossing that line, opening accounts in my name, deceiving, and then threatening to keep our son away, she completely severed any trust we had left. Now, she remains on the outside, missing out on the everyday moments with Daniel, while I am left to pick up the pieces of her choices. In a perfect world, we'd eventually sit down with our new partners, and Daniel would benefit from the care of 2 healthy co-parents, along with the support of 2 loving step-parents. But life isn't perfect, and sometimes the only solace is in celebrating small victories. For me, that victory is my son's well-being. He is safe, happy, and in an ironic twist, I am finally in the position I always want, to care for him full-time, to watch him grow into a teenager, and eventually into a young man. Although no criminal justice action ever truly materialized against Tiffany for her fraudulent actions, everything else eventually fell into place for Daniel. The judge awarded me custody. Daniel feels secure, and Tiffany's manipulations have gradually lost their power over us. It's not the fairy tale ending I once envisioned on my wedding day, but it is the best resolution we could hope for after all that has happened. Above all, it is a testament to the fact that if you stand up for yourself, document every wrongdoing, protect yourself legally, and keep your child's best interest at heart, you can overcome even the worst assaults from an ex-spouse. The struggle may take a toll emotionally and financially, but every mile I drive Daniel to school, every game we play together, and every quiet moment we share at bedtime make it all worthwhile. Maybe one day, Tiffany will straighten out her life and realize that Daniel deserves both of his parents, free from the toxicity of grudges and manipulation. I hope that happens, but until then, I know that I cannot fix her problems, only Daniel's and mine. For now, we are a family that is healing and growing, and no amount of fraudulent credit cards or threats can ever take that away. Even in the quieter times that followed, I found myself haunted by small reminders of the storm we had endured. Occasionally, opening the mailbox would twist my stomach, or an unknown number on my phone would make me flinch. But day by day, I began to regain my confidence. I enrolled Daniel in a weekend basketball league, and my wife and I spent countless hours cheering him on from the bleachers. The change in him was dramatic. The anxious, uncertain child overshadowed by fear was replaced by an exuberant kid who finally felt free to pursue his interests without constant worry. There were times when Daniel asked gentle questions about what had happened with his mother, wondering if she really had stolen my identity, if that was something grown-ups did when they were desperate. I answered honestly, affirming that yes, she had opened accounts in my name and that it hurt me both financially and emotionally. Yet I carefully framed it to emphasize that sometimes people make terrible choices when they feel cornered, and that it didn't mean his mother didn't love him in her own way. I had to balance truth with compassion. Daniel deserved honesty, but I did not want to poison his feelings toward her. Gradually, he stopped asking. He began to see for himself that his mother's decisions were beyond his control, and that he was happiest focusing on the security of the home we had created. My wife, who initially struggled with feeling like a secondary figure, soon became a beloved part of Daniel's life, helping him decorate his room, choose paint colors, and set up his gaming console. They even baked cookies together on lazy Saturday afternoons, filling the house with the aroma of fresh dough and chocolate chips. I would often stand by the kitchen doorway, watching them with immense pride and gratitude that I had found someone who could love Daniel with the nurturing warmth he needed. I wish I could say that Tiffany recognized the damage she had caused and sought to mend her relationship with our son, but for the most part, she remained distant, oscillating between demands for more money and then falling silent when I refused. Occasionally, I heard from mutual acquaintances that her boyfriend was in and out of her life, that she was plagued by job instability, or that she complained bitterly about the custody arrangement. From where I stood, it was clear that her own actions had forced the court's hand. I tried not to dwell on it too much. We had come too far to allow her decisions to define our everyday lives. Perhaps the greatest comfort during this long, arduous journey was witnessing Daniel's resilience. He never turned bitter or resentful. Instead, he developed a quiet empathy for others. I remember him once comforting a friend at school whose parents were divorcing, assuring him that life goes on and that it wasn't the end of the world. Hearing him speak so maturely made me realize how much he had grown from that frightened little boy who used to cling to my hand, terrified of the next upheaval. That was the moment I knew we had truly turned a corner. Eventually, the memories of rushing to the hospital, the bruising fear in my gut, and the long nights agonizing over fraudulent credit accounts began to fade. The trauma never entirely disappeared, but it receded into a quieter corner of my mind, overshadowed by everyday concerns like Daniel's homework, dental appointments, and planning our next family outing. I began to envision a future where Daniel would soon graduate from high school, perhaps go on to college, or pursue whatever passion ignited his spirit. As for Tiffany, I held on to a faint hope that she might someday get her life together and be a stable influence for Daniel. But until that happens, I will continue to protect him from any further chaos. Looking back, although the path we took was strewn with twists, heartbreak, and relentless courtroom battles, I can now say that the outcome is something I can live with. Daniel is safe, healthy, and flourishing, and I have reclaimed my financial stability along with the necessary safeguards to prevent any future credit scams. The most important lesson I learned is the power of perseverance. Sometimes the system feels rigged against you, and those you once trusted can turn their backs. Yet if you meticulously document every wrongdoing, pursue every legal avenue, and never lose sight of your child's best interests, victory, even if bittersweet, is achievable. I wish I could say that justice was served in a neat, televised manner, with Tiffany facing criminal charges for identity theft and receiving a stern lesson. But the real world is messier than that. Instead, life delivered its own consequences. She lost the leverage she once wielded over custody, and she irreparably damaged her relationship with our son. The court recognized her pattern of manipulation, and Daniel saw who was truly there for him when it mattered most. Today, as I watch Daniel sprint across the basketball court, I am filled with an overwhelming sense of pride and relief. The scars of the past remain, but they now serve as reminders of how far we have come, rather than as chains holding us back. I am incredibly grateful that we have reached a state of genuine peace. If there's one takeaway from my story, it is this: never let the fear of retaliation prevent you from standing up for your rights and your child's well-being. Document everything. Seek professional legal advice, and do what is necessary to protect yourself financially, physically, and emotionally. In the end, what matters most is your child's safety and security, not winning a petty war of pride or revenge. That was our path to survival, and it is how I managed to create a stable and fulfilling life after the darkest days of the divorce. Now, Daniel and I look to the future. He talks excitedly about trying out for the varsity basketball team when he reaches high school, and I've made an unspoken promise to be there for every game he plays. We cherish the everyday moments, from post-practice burgers to late-night study sessions for his algebra exams. The shadow of Tiffany's threats and intimidation no longer looms over us, And although we both wish things had unfolded differently, we know we can face whatever comes our way. It's not perfect, but it is ours. A home filled with trust, something that no fraudulent credit card or intimidation tactic can ever destroy. In the grand scheme of things, that is a remarkable triumph, one that Daniel will carry with him as he grows, forging his own path free from the errors of the past.